Hi, everyone. You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiefelman, and I am joined with my co-host every week, Jamie Almanzan. What are you looking at?
Your sweater. Is that the good one?
No.
Or is that?
But I'm working on this one to get, because the other one, I'm so worried. What happened? We can't have 2 weeks in a row where we start off talking about sweaters.
That's just no. Although Dee Dee loved it. Dee Dee
oh, really?
Hilarious. Yeah. I am so clearly, we were talking about this morning with my mom. You and I are both music people, but I don't know if we overlap in our music taste. I've never really dug into your music.
Can I say this? I think we both have a deep appreciation for music. You have an appreciation, I think, for multiple genres, and you go deep into understanding the artists and their discography and all of that. I enjoy playing music. And being in a band. And it's interesting because if I'm very surface, like my family, like my wife and kids have a much deeper appreciation and understanding of artists. And then I'll find a band like Wilco and just be all in on them because I just really enjoy them.
Definitely one of my Uncle Tupelo, one of the bridges to true country music that I took was Uncle Tupelo and all of the alt country sort of movement. But I didn't realize how connected to country I was growing up. And there's Jamie, of all his friends, the only one to own Lyle Lovett albums.
Oh, I see. I like Lyle Lovett too. Yeah.
John Hyatt
that's right.
album.
You're not from Texas. That's right. You're not from Texas.
My friends are like, what is this? And I'm like,
Texas wants you anyhow.
Country music. That was coming up for me because I was just been listening to a ton of music. It's how I work. Been writing this book book on principal competencies for principals. Like, what are the key leadership competencies and what are the skills? This is a book that focuses on embedded real professional learning in the job. Like, you want to learn how to be a principal? You're becoming a principal, or you're becoming certified. You're an AP. Here's an exercise to learn this particular competency. Do this. Try this. Reach out this way. Less about, it's important to build relationships. It doesn't mean that we don't say that kind of stuff. Of course it is. Of course we do. But as I write, I always have music going. I mean, the music's in our house so much, so constantly, that our son, our youngest, Leo, has his own playlists. And he plays DJ at dinner.
That's cool. You have a new book coming out. What is the release date, or when are you thinking about? When's that going to come out?
So our publisher is Corwin, and we're looking at a fall publish date. That's fingers crossed. Everything, theoretically, everything's due today, end of day. But because it's Friday, to me in my head, that means Sunday.
What's the title of this book?
We don't have a title yet. We don't have a title. Maybe I could get your brain thinking about it. It's Principal Leadership Competencies, supporting principal leadership development, specifically as it relates to serving every student, particularly marginalized students.
Got it. Let's talk about Marcus Chambers. Let's do that.
Let's do it. He mentioned coming up through the system, right? That he did basically everything. Started as a substitute teacher and then moved up through the system. There are a good number of, and I talked to a superintendent yesterday in a small district in Oregon who too, what came up his entire career. He's a 30+ year educator, all in one district, and now is a superintendent. And it makes me wonder what you didn't do that. And I'm interested to know what your perspective is on the two paths there.
I did do it that way. Isn't that amazing?
I thought you were, but your first superintendency was Columbia, right?
Oh, so I came from Oakland, where I was a teacher and a teacher on special assignment and then an assistant principal. Then I moved from California to Missouri. And my first year I was working on my dissertation. So I was a volunteer at an elementary school, reading with children 3 days a week. And then I became a third grade teacher in the district. And then I returned to that school where I had been a volunteer as its principal, assistant principal, then principal. And then I moved up to assistant superintendent. And then when the superintendent retired, I became superintendent. So I actually really understood to some extent, I think, Marcus and the work that he was doing, because you have really deep relationships. So I think you heard me say, I think in the conversation, boy, you really have to be careful because you have these relationships. You want to have this open door policy. You want people that you've known forever to be able to come in and talk to you. And you don't recognize, at least it sounds like Marcus does. I didn't. which is the unintended consequence of what you're doing to people when you allow them to bypass their supervisors to go talk to their friend Peter about something that they're dealing with. So I think it's interesting for those who have grown up in their system and are now leading their system. This is a great opportunity to listen to Marcus talk a little bit about that. And for those who are thinking about promoting from within, to help them support those leaders who are going to be leading others who have had different relationships, throughout the organization and are now leading, and what that's going to look like. So why don't we listen to the conversation and we'll come back.
Let's do that.
Let us also remind you, you're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Also, if you enjoy this episode and if you've learned something today, please consider following the show or leaving us a 5-star review. This really does help the podcast more than I can say, and it allows us to reach more and more people. And that would just mean the world to us. So thank you so much. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? Kind of a silly question, because I know you are. Empath Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with Empath Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. Empath Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Marcus D. Chambers, Superintendent of the Okaloosa County Schools in Okaloosa County, Florida. Marcus, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Well, I appreciate it. And when I was thinking about the title, I thought that's actually a perfect title for a show as it pertains to superintendents and leadership.
Perfect, because one of our questions as we end the first segment is I ask you, hey, what does this term mean to you? So we'll wait. Okay. With bated breath, we will wait. So,
yes, sir.
So listen, I know that your job is deeply personal since it's been described to me that you grew up in the Okaloosa County Schools, that you rose through the ranks as an educator, you were an ELA teacher, an assistant superintendent, you were responsible for HR over 26 years, and then you were appointed and then subsequently elected superintendent. And I'm curious, how has that experience shaped your approach to leadership in your district, to grow up within that district?
And I'd say for me personally, I think it's a good thing. Being very familiar with your school district. I started as a substitute teacher at a college and was able to get a job right away as an ELA teacher. But seeing the culture of a school district from substitute to teacher, and then from teacher to administrator, you get a good feeling for what this school district's about. And here in Okaloosa County, there's a long legacy of academic excellence and continuing to get stronger on the athletics and the arts. We also, we talk about we're an A+ school district, and people will say, why A+? Because the academics is first and foremost, but the plus is also the arts and the athletics. So coming up in this school district, I was able to experience all that as a coach and a teacher, was able to experience that as a principal of leading an elementary, middle school, and high school, 3 different schools, but to live it. So when I had the opportunity to become an assistant superintendent, it was about now more than just a classroom or just a school. It's about impacting an entire school district. And I was blessed to be able to do that. But the thing that I clearly understand at the school principal level or the level that I am right now, it's on the backs of our teachers, staff, and administrators who work hard every day for our students.
Well, you help the nation understand, those who are listening, they have an idea of how school districts are divided up. In Missouri, where I was, 518 school districts. Similarly, in Massachusetts, there are, I don't remember, 200 and something school districts. Florida is different. It has very few districts, and then they're made up of, can you explain to me? I think I understand it.
No, absolutely. First of all, I'd say I feel blessed to work here in the state of Florida, and Okaloosa is one of 67 school districts across the state. So 67 districts make up this fine state, and Okaloosa strives to be a leader amongst them.
How many students are you responsible for?
We have approximately 32,000 students here. Yeah. In Okaloosa, about 38 schools, about 4 charter schools, and we also have a technical college as well. but about 38 schools that I'm responsible for each day.
So these are children who are attending the technical college or getting their industry recognized credentials while also getting their high school diplomas?
So it's a mixture. That the technical college, there are some students who will go there for those industry certifications. At the technical college, it's not as large because all of our high schools have strong, robust career and technical education programs housed at their school. So the technical college is more of an adult program and really working with our military here and those in the local workforce to give them industry trades where they can be marketable. We're actually, next year, we're looking to expand from the southern part of the county to the northern part of the county. So we'll have 2 campuses, which is a big deal for us.
That's really amazing. You think about, I imagine many of the adults who are taking these courses, who are enrolled, also have children within your own district. So you're really being able to demonstrate the benefit of what a school district can mean for a local community as well as a county.
Absolutely. And I'll say one of the things that we say when we talk to businesses or chambers of commerce, we go out and speak, and I clearly understand that a healthy school district helps for a healthy community. So if we can do our part in being a strong school system, but also providing opportunities for others, it's going to be a benefit to our county as a whole.
I heard someone in Tennessee tell me communities with the best schools win. And often you think win means that someone else loses. So I really appreciate your approach to it of healthy communities have healthy schools. So that's great. I'm actually really interested in the role of an elected official. That's not common around the nation. I'm wondering if you could describe the benefits and maybe the challenges associated with being elected instead of selected.
I would say for me, being an elected superintendent, your evaluation are the citizens in your county. And I think when you're held accountable by the voters, to me, there's a positive to that. I think it draws you even closer to businesses. I think it draws you closer to the parents and families and just the community as a whole. So for me, it's all I've ever known here in Okaloosa because I've been here my entire career. I know there are places where there's appointed superintendents, and that works as well. I think in place where there's appointed superintendents, the school board and the superintendent, those dynamics might be a little bit different. But I'll say here in Okaloosa, I'm blessed to be an elected superintendent, but I'm also blessed to have an amazing school board that supports what we do. They ask questions in terms of what we're doing, but just on the team, and they do an absolutely outstanding job for our school district.
So that to me is what I would have thought the benefit is that you're responsible to your community, and then they let you know through an election whether or not they wish to continue to be led by you. And I think that's different for those of us who have had 7-member boards. And I can speak to my community, which was 300 square miles, and 5 out of the 7 board members lived in the southern part of the district, in which case, while they ostensibly were responsible for the whole district, they brought a lens of priority potentially of what is best for south of town. And maybe it often, if things came down to a vote, you could maybe expect that south of town would prevail over north of town. And in this case, your community as a whole says, is he meeting the needs of all of us in terms of our vote and what an election looks like?
I believe so. And I think even with our school board members, we have 5 here, and each of them are from a different region of the county. But again, I think part of the piece
is that by design? Is that by design?
That's by design.
Yeah.
By design. But they each of them represent their region or their area well. But again, I'm blessed because they represent the entire county. So they don't look at it as I'm just this southeastern part. They are part of the entire school district. And for me, that's all I know. So I'm just blessed to have that.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, our guest today is Superintendent Marcus Chambers, the superintendent of the Okaloosa County Schools in Okaloosa, Florida. I believe strongly in a human-centered leadership model, and terms like empathy and compassion, those are really powerful terms. And they're really important components of the model. And I saw examples of these terms when I read that even through Hurricane Milton, even though it was hundreds of miles away, your community mobilized to support others. And I read about it also in your Catching the Wave publication. It's an emphasis on the arts, as you mentioned earlier, an emphasis on mental health, on innovative practices, on community service. It really speaks to the human-centered leader that you are and the human-centered board that serves the community. Would you tell us a little bit about how do you arrive at a vision like that for your school district?
So I'd say for me, once I was elected, we looked at what is the next generation of Okaloosa schools going to look like. And it revolved around 6 pillars: academic excellence, continuous learning, being student-focused, having safer schools, modern innovation, and community engagement. And that last one, I work in a county, live in a county where the folks here support our schools, and they want to have strong schools. And they give up their time, their money, their efforts. And we wanted to be a school district on the community engagement side that not only takes, but also gives back. And so I'm proud during Christmas time, we have an angel tree project where we partner with the sheriff's, or it's Thanksgiving, and we provide meals for families. But then it's also about having strong communication through social media, through the Catch the Wave that we do here, and to our business partners as well. We want to try to be as transparent as we can be, provide good information, and when things happen, hit them head on, but also talk about the positive things going on. And I firmly believe that in today's world, we have to share the positives about what's happening in classrooms, the amazing work teachers are doing, the amazing work of bus drivers, custodians, classroom aides, and of course, our principals and district staff. So we're about creating a climate of positivity while at the same time being able to hit difficulties head on.
As you're talking, first of all, for those who are listening, often when individuals talk about their vision or their work in terms of the pillars, they may look down at their notes and you look straightforward. You are living these, you know them. They are a part of your leadership DNA. And so I was super impressed. I was like, wow, he really knows them. He really knows them. As you were talking also, it made me think of Lavelle Brown up in Ithaca, New York. It made me think of Shelley Berman, formerly of Lexington, Kentucky, of Scott Menzel in Scottsdale, Arizona, who really speak to reclaiming the narrative around schools, because we as leaders have an obligation absolutely to provide our children with an excellent education. And then having a shared image of what that means. And so in terms of the innovative practices, the emphasis on the arts, sharing your goals for athletics and your technical college and all these different ways that you're engaging and lifting up the learning for children, I think are really good examples. When you say that there are challenges that you hit them head on, I'm curious, are there any that come to mind immediately?
Well, I would say right now, we have 32,000 students, love them all. And I think in today's day and age, there's behaviors that are exhibited by students it's different. Not necessarily any fault of anybody, but some of the behaviors are different. And we have to be able to talk about that and not hide from that, and support our teachers and staff, administrators, and schools. And I think it's critical to be able to talk to parents about that. I think it's critical to look at legislation that supports our teachers in schools and has accountability measures for us, but also accountability measures for families as well. Yeah. I say that in our county, I'm blessed again, the overwhelming majority of our families are invested, and they're invested in their child and their school. I would love to have 100%. And I know that
I was going to say, you're going to have to be satisfied with excellence. Nobody gets perfection. Superintendent Chambers, no way.
No, but I say that purposefully because there's of whatever that percentage of those who are involved and maybe those who aren't as involved as maybe they would like, there's that gap. And in that gap, I think we have to work through partnerships, because these behaviors are significant at times. And when they impact other students or the classroom or the school function, we got to make sure that students are getting the help that they need and deserve. And it takes a partnership to ensure that students get the help and the needs that they deserve. So
to me, that's a very systems thinking approach. It's schools are absolutely a great place to try to resolve many of the challenges that our children face, and they cannot do it alone. And so they have to be connected to the other aspects of the system that can also intervene and support. And I think of Governor DeSantis, he was one of the first governors in the nation to push for legislation that prohibited phones in schools, or he called it a phone ban. I'd like to think of it more as phone free, because there is a role to leverage phones for technology. But I think he and others, and I imagine the state's superintendents around the state thought similarly, how difficult it is to be able to provide children with a safe and engaging school environment when social media is so readily available to their kids. And so I imagine you heard from your own teachers that is a big issue for them. When you think about hitting things head on, we're just pulling kids out of the river when we know why they're falling in, and the phones were a part of it. So I'm curious about what you thought about that.
Well, I'd say, first of all, I think trying in today's world to compete with social media, compete with the games that are on these phones and other devices, that's hard. Here in our county, we have a policy that in essence says that phones are going to be put up unless the teacher asks for it to come out for educational purposes. So it's a matter of also us doing our job in that. Now, we know kids can be kids. And so
you're smarter than we are.
There are. And we don't do a full ban, so to speak, even though we have policy that prohibits it unless the teacher says to bring it out. But there are some schools who take other measures, such as place your cell phone in the pouch when you come in. Our schools have a autonomy in terms of how they're going to deal with it, just making sure that we have good processes in place and how we're going to implement that. But cell phones are definitely a distraction when not monitored or having policy in place. So I agree. It's a huge factor, but I think schools having the ability to handle that the right way is one of the ways that we handle it.
Yeah, well, you're certainly speaking to local control and the importance of knowing your community and then doing what's best for your community with your community.
Yes.
Okay, we're at the point where I get to ask you the question of how does that term resonate for you?
Well, I think every day there are decisions that we make that we wish maybe we would have made better. I think the imperfect leader also takes the stress off of wanting to be perfect. And I think folks who get into leadership, whether that's the teacher, the principal, or the superintendent, you would like to say that every decision you make is perfect, that every action you do is with excellence and it's perfect. And I think the name of your podcast, which really struck me, was it takes a little bit of that pressure off, that I don't care who you are, there's pieces of you that are an imperfect leader. And it also leads to you haven't arrived. I don't care who you are, you haven't arrived. So it's about getting better. And if we can have a mindset that we're not perfect and there are things that we do that are imperfect, then I think in the long run, we're going to be even better.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being. And I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And our guest is Superintendent Marcus Chambers, the superintendent of the Okaloosa County Schools in Okaloosa, Florida. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made and then, what did they learn from it? So Marcus, what happened?
So I would say it's post-pandemic reality. And I'll just say for me here in Okaloosa, when we were in the pandemic, it was about not the rigor of education necessarily. It was not necessarily about let's get ready for these tests and these test scores. It was about empathy. It was about helping families. It was about helping our teachers get through life. But the post-pandemic piece, in my mind as a superintendent, you have to be very mindful of where your teachers are, your principals are, and your students are in terms of their mindset and their not only willingness, but their ability to be pushed. So I think it is critical to understand that. And I think when we first came out, it was making sure that we nurture people forward. But now we're at a place where I believe, for the sake of students, that we have to push. And then when I say a push, I call it appropriate pressure. And appropriate pressure isn't the fist down on the table. It's not, we must do this, but it is, we're going to do the things that we said we're going to do. We're going to provide resources where we said we're going to do something. And we're going to encourage and we're going to support. So there's that appropriate pressure to implement instruction for students that's going to be meaningful. And that's hard in today's world where the standards are more rigorous. The assessments are definitely more rigorous. And sometimes there's a belief that this is too much for students and we can't fall into that. So it's about, how do you as a superintendent motivate your principals? Help them to see that absolutely we can do this. What are we going to take off our plate so we can add this piece to it? How do we look at our assistant principals in terms of what they're responsible for so that the principal can be the instructional leader that we need her to be or him to be? And students absolutely can step up to the challenge. So again, for me, it's how hard do you push? When do you pull back? And I think you have to be understanding. You have to know where your principals are, know where your teachers are for that to happen. So lots of conversations that need to be had so you're not just forging ahead blindly.
When you say forging ahead blindly, it makes me think of we're right behind you. And then it's like, where are you? How far behind me are you? So, okay. So if I understand correctly, and this is a really interesting topic because lots of people are thinking about this even to today, and the pandemic, as we might have understood it, sunset in a lot of ways in 2022, and yet we're in 2025 and we're still thinking about these things. And I think maybe the best metaphor that I've heard someone describe it as is like you can flip a light switch to make the lights turn on, or you can gradually turn that dial and the lights come on gradually. And I remember hearing someone say, yeah, but at some point the lights have to come on. You can't just keep, like, the dimmer switch can't be so slow that we are still only focusing on, because schools have always focused on empathy and compassion for children and meeting their most basic needs. It became the dedicated focus of school districts during the pandemic. And then as we pull out of the pandemic, we have to reintroduce the standards that we said that we were holding children and adults to in terms of student learning. So I'm curious, as you have been leading that work, there are some things maybe that get overlooked. I think I heard you say something around, we had to prioritize. We had to say, what are some things that we're not going to do anymore? That sometimes has an unintended consequence of those who have been the champions of that initiative or champions of that program to say, no, that's super important. So I'm curious, just what got overlooked as you were bringing your students back to these high standards that you had pre-pandemic?
So this might sound silly, but I think, I'm not sure the word's overlooked, but it might be, I'll just say this. So accountability. So we've always been a school district that's about accountability in the right way. But when we were coming out of the pandemic, to hold people to that same level of accountability, I don't believe would have been right, because they weren't ready for it. When we talk about students, because that's the ultimate reason why we're here, in order for our students to get the most of what they need, our adults have to be ready as well. So coming out, definitely the first year, and really even almost into the second year, it was about meeting adults where they are. And so that's a piece that I didn't necessarily anticipate, because we're thinking about our students, but we put a lot of effort into thinking about our employees. And so now we're at a point where there's a coach out of Duke University, the girls' head basketball coach, and she talks about doing hard better. And it's not that we need to work harder, it's do hard better. And we have to understand that life's not easy. This is the new norm, whether we like it or not. So it's our ability to adjust to that new norm. And if we're going to be leaders, we need to understand where we are in today's world and can we do this? Because I believe that leadership today takes toughness, perseverance, the ability to motivate, inspire, challenge folks, but not push them over the edge. And these things were the same pre-pandemic, but I think it's different in terms of mindsets or the total number of mindsets that we have to be very vigilant in understanding as we push forward for excellence. And if we're not thinking about those things, we can push people off the cliff, so to speak.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, I had this scorecard and we were focused on finances, academics, climate, and employees. FACE was the acronym for us. And then within academics, we had certain areas that we said were our priorities, and we had certain initiatives that were supposed to be for thinking, systems thinking, if we do X, we should expect Y. And then as that increases, we may have to increase our delivers or the way that we deliver an intervention or a program, things like that. And then post-pandemic, it required us to rethink how we were going to approach the same challenges that existed pre-pandemic. However, to your point, our humans who we work with they had changed. And we learned a lot about relationships. And I think that you're speaking to relationships to some degree. And I'm curious, what did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed?
I think learning about relationships it reaffirms that relationships matter. On the top of our next generation of Okaloosa schools, there's relationships is on the top, accountability's on the side. So relationships absolutely matter. And today, when you have students who deal with mental health issues, so to speak, probably even more predominantly, or teachers or principals who struggle, relationships matter. And it's having an active effort, not to just say that, but to experience that, whether that's in a principal's meeting, whether that's in a one-on-one meeting, whether that's in all teachers coming together across the district for a message. I think relationships are the key. I say to new administrators, when I sit across from them, I meet with everyone that's a new AP, and I say, what do you believe is the single most important factor in becoming a new administrator? And they always pause, and because they're thinking of what I want the answer to be. And there's many different answers. But in my mind, it's your ability to communicate and have strong relationships. And those two go hand in hand. So today, I think it's never been more important.
I have to imagine they don't get to that one-on-one with you unless they've demonstrated that relationships have been important. What are certain things that you're looking for that really exemplify relationship building?
The first one is humility. The same thing I say to them, it doesn't matter whether it's the custodian, the governor, the superintendent, the parent, or the teacher. It should be Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, and being humble. I always say there's two types of new administrators. Those who are beating their chest, I'm now an administrator, I'm in charge, and those who understand that they're now a new administrator with a need to serve and make a difference in the lives of others. And those who come in humble aren't weak, but those who come in humble, more times than not, they're the ones who are successful.
It seems like they come in humble and they come in with a willingness to be vulnerable. You're in this new job. You bring a lot of experience, but you've never done this job before. And now you have a lot to learn from the people who you're going to serve, including, I imagine, the substitute teachers, because you probably have a special place in your heart for those who have done that work, which is such hard work. Yeah. I'm curious. We have just a couple of questions left. Is there something you would have done differently coming back from the pandemic, knowing that you had a set of goals, you have relationships at the core, you have accountability as a driving force because you have an expectation for yourself, but certainly your public that elects you has an expectation as well. Is there something you would have done differently?
I mean, I would love to say right off the top of the head, yes. And I'm certain there's probably 100 things. But the thing
certainly makes for better radio listening or podcast listening. So yes, good answer. Now, what else?
But here's what I would say. I'm extremely proud because when the pandemic hit, we had to go online, even in Florida, we had to go online at the very beginning. And in literally days, we had devices that were sent out to everybody. The infrastructure to have the online learning was there. And it was, I wouldn't say it was seamless, but to get that out to 32,000 families, I was proud. To get the students back in school, or at least here in Okaloosa, that was very important to get them back in school. But then there were some students who were in school, then went out of school, and then came back. So going through of all the ups and downs, the uncertainties, who's here, who's not here, to get through all of that, if you can get through the pandemic, you can get through anything. The budgets were hard in terms of being able to provide everything that you needed to provide. We're lucky our state did a good job with that, but it was just hard. But to get through it, I was blessed to have excellent principals who lived it every day and teachers who did so much behind the scenes and after school and on the weekends for kids. Remarkable. The pandemic, as it divided folks.
Oh, yes.
So you realize that as a superintendent, you better have tough skin, because no matter what decision you make, there's a certain segment of the population is not going to be happy.
Yep. I called it like a snow day on steroids because I had a cop car outside my house for 4 months because of it didn't bring out the best in people. And a big part of that was people were scared for their kids and their kids' futures, and it just manifested in different ways. I can look back now and say, I don't think these people wanted to hurt me. They were angry and scared, and I was the figurehead that represented the gate, the obstacle to getting children back into school is how they may have viewed it. Looking back, I can feel a little bit more charitable about how I felt at that moment. And so I take one more swing at what could you have done differently? And I only take a swing at it because you had said something about when we came back, one of the things that we recognized, so it wasn't necessarily an overlooked because it wasn't expected, was the care that adults needed to be able to do the very best for kids. And I wonder what you might have done differently, just looking at that small piece. That I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I absolutely, now that you say that, I would have definitely done some things differently coming out of that with our adults. I would have liked to have done it quicker to have different resources for adults. So for example, now we have through telemed, we have free sessions for our employees and X number of free sessions. We also have X number of free sessions per topic area for mental health or other related services for our employees.
Oh, that's great.
If I would have known the impact it would have also had on the adults earlier, we could have had some of those different programs for our employees earlier as opposed to maybe 2 years later. We do things called bonuses now that some people do. And so recognizing the hard work and effort of everybody, and you can't always do a bonus because there's a lot of money to that, but also trying to prioritize where you can, because again, it's different today. So we've started doing that now. We did a little bit of that during the pandemic also, where we had some funds to do so. But I think the biggest piece is understanding the impact on the adults. I think we could have definitely done a better job with that.
Yeah, it actually makes me think that even at a state level, we probably should have done that for superintendents, an employee assistance program type thing. For SUPs, they have it obviously available to them in their own district. And it took me 2 years to really recover from just the devastating decisions that we were making to either keep kids out, keep adults out, to how to get food to kids, how to get there. This will become my own mental health session. So you could leave for a little bit. I'll just keep talking about, don't go. So let me ask you this. In the end, and I think you started to tell this, what was something that was good that came out of the situation?
I think it's I'll just say for our leaders, just, being a superintendent on your podcast and talking to other superintendents and their leadership and how they impact their principals. I think principals realize that they can do so much more. And the challenges that they once thought were challenges, though real, I think we now see that we're much tougher than maybe we thought. I think we have the ability to really impact students in such a way where now it's not only the instructional side, but it's really truly looking at the whole student. So we're better because of that. I think we're also more grateful to realize that the great things that we have, I'll say at least here at Okaloosa with the arts programs. I think we have some of the best band and chorus programs and theater programs around. I humbly say that. Athletically, we have from middle school, we have the majority of the sports. That's part of our middle school programs. And of course, all of them at the high school level. So just, again, I think it's also realizing the impact that we make as educators and not taking it for granted.
Our guest today was Superintendent Marcus Chambers, the superintendent of the Okaloosa Schools in Okaloosa, Florida. And Marcus, I just wrote a couple of notes down as we were talking first. A big part of the first segment, you used the word blessed and how blessed you are to have all these people in your lives. I have to imagine every one of them would say how blessed they feel to have you as their leader. And the reason why I say that is, in addition to talking about doing hard better, it actually, you bring a compassion to this work about do relationships like better and make them enduring, and do accountability in a way that says it's a promise, not something to be scared of, but a promise that we make children and the adults, and then to lead and to learn with humility and vulnerability. And I'll use the word too. I felt blessed to have you today. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
All right, so we're back.
Dig in, man. Let's start with this. I mean, there's a bunch of things that I thought were really cool about what Marcus had to say. The first one where he says, I would say for me, being an elected superintendent, your evaluation is done by the citizens in your county. And I think when you're held accountable by the voters, to me, there's a positive to that. And it draws you even closer to businesses. I think it draws you closer to the parents and families and just the community as a whole. I was like, wow, he's elected.
Right.
How many have this?
I mean, my question of like, tell me about being elected versus selected. Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. I knew nothing of that. And meanwhile, here was an elected superintendent for a county. Yeah.
And an elected board.
Yeah.
Right. So couldn't if you're a superintendent is elected, couldn't you theoretically have a superintendent that has no experience in education whatsoever?
Yes. I imagine that's true.
I mean, that makes me think of the Department of Ed and the Federal Department of Ed and the number of people that we've had.
Smackdown, Superfly Snooker Smackdown.
Superfly Snooker. That wasn't my favorite. My favorite was
Junkyard Dog.
No, Ric Flair. Ric Flair. What is he called? Not the Pretty Boy. Was it Pretty Boy? Pretty Boy Ric Flair or something like that.
Okay.
We're not talking about
so very interesting that you could be elected. I hadn't even thought about the fact that you could be elected and not have any education experience. I know for a fact that when I was in Oakland, there was a period of time where there was a business leader who was appointed superintendent, and his big thing was answering the phones in a certain way. Like that was his big campaign. Allendale Elementary School, this is Peter Stibman speaking. How may I help you? And he would just cold call schools. Like that seems like the most important thing in Oakland at the moment. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
A theme that came up 3 times in the interview that you had with him that I think I'm like, oh, I bet you this is on his mind a lot as an elected superintendent. I think it's on superintendents' minds, but because he's elected, I wonder if it's on his mind a little bit more. And that was basically, the theme was be in good relationship with your community. He says it, I'll give you the quotes that it stood out in. You asked him, I imagine that many of the adults who are taking these courses in the tech college have children within their own district. So you're really able to demonstrate the benefit of what a school district can mean for a local community. He says, absolutely. And I'll say one of the things that we say when we talk to businesses of chambers and chambers of commerce, we go out and speak. And I clearly understand that a healthy school district helps for a healthy community. Later on, he says, understanding your audience and how hard you can push or not push and win. But you got to get to a point where, okay, that's enough. We have to educate kids. And it had me really asking this question, like, and this is, I'm interested to know your approach to this as a superintendent in a decently sized district here. How do you understand your audience as a superintendent?
Yeah. And often superintendents
what do you actually do?
Accused of not fully harvesting the wisdom of their community, because if you have been historically underrepresented in rooms of power, then your default is why even get involved or give my opinion or even begin to talk, right? I mean, I imagine that's a big part of the work you and Greg lead in terms of like, how do we make sure that we are making decisions with and for our entire community, not just for some. And so one of the things that we did in our community was we hosted each year a World Cafe. And a World Cafe is a very scripted process that involves a very brief presentation and then a ton of listening. And we were really intentional to make sure that we would do it in a place that had good public transit or that had the ability to offer childcare and that had some food, so that we were, and at the part of the day where people were leaving work, but not already home and having to come back out. I wish we could have done it even more at varying hours, because not everybody works a traditional 9 to 5. So I recognize we fell short in some ways, but a World Cafe, it asks one big question and then encourages the community to provide their very best feedback. And that is captured in a variety of ways. Written on little placemats, with having a person at the table taking notes whose only job is to be the sort of table captain and just write down what people are saying, not agree or disagree. The one piece that I think that could be interesting with AI is to then try to have to the best extent possible, because AI is inherently biased because somebody had to program it, but to have AI be able to say, what are the big themes that are being expressed from all these conversations? And it helped us answer some questions, everything from, should we ask for a tax increase? Or how much is the community willing to bear? Should we go one-to-one with technology? And what might that look like? Should we invest in early childhood education? And why is that important for the community? How do people think about what does life ready mean when we talk about we're preparing kids to be life ready? What is the value? What is the most important thing for our community in terms of preparing kids for a life outside of public schools? So anyway, I'll stop there. That's kind of how you do it, or how we do it.
But what I think is, can I ask a follow-up question? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
I love this. I mean, we do this all the time as an outside organization. We facilitate World Cafes regularly. It is a standard protocol of ours. We're big believers in protocols. We are a coaching organization. What protocols do, or structured conversations, is they assure that you get multiple people sharing their thinking. I always sort of make this joke that if you go into a meeting and someone says, hey, can we just have an open dialogue? That person's about to dominate the meeting. So
I didn't realize that. You're so right, though. That's so funny.
Can't we just talk? Can't we just talk? No, we can't, because no one needs 20 minutes of you. That's a Jamie, though. I put myself squarely in that. This is the big aha. One of the big ahas of my life was, I'm that guy. I don't have a problem talking. I'm doing a podcast with you, for God's sakes. This is easy. What I have a hard time doing and learning, and what I practice daily, is listening, shutting up. And so my follow-up question is this. That protocol requires that people come to a place and do that together. How do you know your community as the superintendent in a big place like Columbia, where it isn't people coming to you, but you going to them? What does that look like? What steps do you take?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that. So a couple of things come to mind. One is, for both Marcus and me, we both grew up in the system. And so we got to know even those small pockets of community groups that don't typically come to the board office, but are doing good work independent of the schools. And so trying to stitch our mission to theirs and seeing where there's connection. I would say also, it's really important to have those World Cafes not in the schools, not a school building, not at the administration building. Everybody come to my mountain and then I'll listen to you. So I sometimes got criticism from my own team when I'd say, well, let's go do it at the rec center. Let's go. They're like, rec center is not the great spot. I'm like, you know what? It's where people are. Let's go there, So
yeah.
I think that's what you try to do. And then I also did monthly luncheon. I think I may have mentioned this once to you. It was a lunch meeting at Centro Latino because the executive director of Centro Latino said, yeah, I've got things to tell you, but I'm too busy to come out to you, or come visit with you. I said, what if we come to you? And I'll pay for lunch, So now it's a revenue generator for Centro Latino that had a commercial kitchen, and we're making meals. And then different smaller groups that didn't often get a lot of airtime would send a representative, and I would talk, hopefully for a very small part of the time, to say, here's something we're working on. Like, for example, big film festival in our community, huge documentary film festival called True False. And we would send all our 10th graders. So 1,300 10th graders would go to True False Film Festival as a annual event. From all the high schools would go. They'd meet the director of a film that was chosen by the festival. And often the movies that were chosen were like Bully. So great, awesome documentary about a kid who's bullied at school. They would show Won't You Be My Neighbor? Fantastic film, Mr. Rogers, right?
Yeah.
Well, in the wake of Michael Brown being murdered in Ferguson, the festival chose I'm Not Your Negro, James Baldwin. And they told me 2 weeks ahead, all right, so it's going to be I'm Not Your Negro. I'm like, wait, what? Like, not that I'm against it. However, for a community that is more purple than blue, there's going to be a lot of conversation that needs to happen, particularly also for teachers, majority white, and for students to be able to express what they're thinking in terms of like what James Baldwin is going to say about the U.S., about his experience. And so I went to this community group in particular and said, all right, help me think this through, because I don't want to shy away from the movie. I also want to be really prepared. And so they helped me think through. And so did principals were marvelous and teachers were fantastic, our social studies teachers, in terms of creating listening circles and following the films and creating discussion questions that they were all going to adhere to, so that it wasn't just, hey, can we just have an open dialogue?
Can I make 2 connections to what you just said? I thought that was awesome. That was amazing. It was such a good answer. The first connection is Centro Latino saying, I don't have time. You're going to have to come to me. Makes me think of literally the person or the research that I follow and am so devoted to is a man named Ernesto Ciroli, who works as supporting entrepreneurs, becoming entrepreneurs. And his entire approach, his entire theory of action is shut up, don't talk. He says, we come to communities with 0 ideas. We have no infrastructure. And what he's preaching is that person has ideas and you're in the way. They don't need you. They just need the connection that you can help them make. And so I love that about Centro Latino saying, yeah, come here. And you're like, yes, which leads me to the second reflection. And that is, this is an opinion. Strong leadership is about leaning in when you're uncomfortable, leaning in when it looks like somebody will make you feel silly. You have to lean in. There's a comedian right now that I've seen little clips of on YouTube who is a white teacher. Actually, he does this often. It's a white teacher who teaches a black school, and his friend is a black teacher who teaches a white school. And meaning predominantly black kids, predominantly white kids. And they talk about their experiences. And every time when the white teacher talks, it's sort of like, oh, he's getting schooled. He's getting schooled constantly. Like the one joke that is still just resonating with me. He said, I brought chicken to school to eat for lunch. And one of my students said, it looks like your chicken was seasoned with thoughts and prayers. I'm like, kids are geniuses. Genius. That person deserves a comedy medal. Give that kid an AP credit for that joke alone. The fact that he's leaning into it and going with it and posting about it and saying that was hilarious to me and not getting offended by it, but hanging with the kids. They're looking for connection across difference.
Yeah.
And they're okay with you being who you are. Season your bland chicken with thoughts and prayers, but also take it when I name it. Then you can name it back to me. And that's how we connect across culture. And what I hear in your approach is that leaning in. I lean in to the people who I'm not connected to. I lean into people to better understand what they care about, what they value. That's everything. That is literally as an organization, our entire approach. You lean in to understand what other people care about.
I love it. And this is how I'll end our conversation today is I felt that in my conversation with Marcus, that there were pieces, particularly when I asked him about imperfect leadership, and he said, about embracing imperfection and continuous improvement. He said that it resonated with him because suggesting that it alleviates the pressure to be perfect. He says, there's always room for improvement, regardless of one's position. And it takes the stress off of wanting to be perfect. And it also leads to the fact that you just haven't arrived. And so it's about getting better. And I think that's what you're saying in terms of leaning in is this deep desire to keep getting better. And so I was grateful for his time and certainly grateful for yours. So I'll see you next week.
I will see you next week.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.